Nous avons, comme on a Skype, me semble-t-il, hein, c'est par Skype que nous avons donc notre deuxième doctorante. Et là, il s'agit de Katy Beinart que nous allons saluer. Welcome, Katy. Vous êtes doctorante à The Bartlett University College de Londres. Là, vous allez nous parler de ce thème très joli, de la poétique du ciel, vous voyez, la poétique du ciel, la poétique du sel. On n'est pas loin. Donc, Katy Beinart, je vous en prie.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry I can't join you today, and I'm speaking from and I'm going to introduce what I'm doing by telling you a personal history. My great-grandfather was a salt trader in South Africa over 100 years ago, and this is how I first became interested in salt. And through this, I developed my idea for a practice-based PhD, which I'm now doing, and I'm nearly finished, which is why I can't join you. I just wanted to begin by, I'm sure many people are familiar with the qualities of salt, but some of the things I was interested in were about salt's use in ritual and how salt had been used in rituals of blessing, protection, crossing new thresholds into homes, perhaps protecting newborn babies, preventing bad spirits from entering houses, and perhaps also thinking about salt as representing a kind of salted earth after battle. So I was interested in how salt's become part of our metaphor and language. And I started to read poetry and literature about salt, such as Sel Noir or Black Salt by Edward Glissant, and other writers like Pablo Neruda, Rafael Alberti, and Fernando Pessoa, who have written salt poetry. And through this, I got interested in salt having many different meanings across different cultures. And I started to do some research and found out about an essay by a British psychoanalyst called Ernest Jones, who wrote about salt's symbolic significance. Again, this was about 100 years ago. So I put together, drawing from his list, a kind of list of salt's qualities. And I wanted to test these qualities to produce what I would call a poetics of salt. So through my practice, my art practice, I also got interested in the idea that salt could act as an index. So if we think about different kinds of signs, we have symbols, mobility. Yeah, can you hear me? Okay. And between these different readings of salt, I suggest that a development of a poetics of salt might represent migration and change, and how that connects to places in our cities where there is kind of fluctuating population. So my practices were basically to try and test these stories of salt through a series of stories, and to use salt as a trace of the story and the journey. And I termed these journeys detours and retours after Glissant's kind of literary device of a detour and a retour. So Glissant's idea was about a detour being a way around, a different way or a rerouting of a particular piece of language or idea, which would maybe subvert it and offer a different way of taking it on. So I wanted to take this as a literal detour and retour, and I developed the idea for 4 journeys, starting from what I call my home place, which is Brixton in London. So in Brixton, there's a huge market, and it sells goods from all over the world, and there are quite a lot of products in the market that use salt. So you have salt fish, you have ritual salts, you have salts used in different kinds of preparations for food, also preserving food, and all different journeys to try and find the source of the story of salt. So that on my poster, you can see the 4 journeys that I made, and I'm just going to talk briefly about each one of these journeys and what I made on the journey and what I found out about salt poetics. Excuse me. So in the first journey, I travelled to South Africa to try and find the source of the story about my great-grandfather. And we went to find the salt pans where he'd gathered the salt. When we got there, what was fascinating was that somebody had an archive of photographs relating to when the salt pans were harvested and used. They weren't in use anymore. The salt pan. Can you hear me?
Okay. That's good.
Very well.
Thank you.
Shall I carry on? So the first artwork shows the installation in South Africa that we made, and the artwork represents the salt pan, but also the problems about heritage, where you can look at the past, but you also have to face the difficulties and the contested facts about the past. In South Africa, the salt represented a complicated and difficult history about whether you take on the politics of the place, whether you assimilate with the culture, which was very racist and divided. So the salt represented a kind of connection to the past and the ability to both preserve but also erase the past. And in another work, we preserved vegetables using the salt on the salt pan. So it represented a kind of balance of preservation.
Hello, Katy.
Sorry, apologies for the bad connection. So should I carry on talking now? Okay, fantastic. Okay, so we traveled to Lithuania, again, researching the family story, but also taking a ritual called chlebosolni from using bread and salt from the market and remaking it on our journey. And we went to find a kind of trace of our own Jewish history in that region. And in this journey, I was interested in the idea of salt as a trace of memory, which uses both Glissont's idea of a trace, which is both a physical retracing and also a form of memory that is handed down. Using the bread and the salt, dipping bread in salt and eating it on a threshold became of performance to repeat this ritual, which was a very old ritual, and connect to our past. So it was a kind of trace of memory where there was actually there was an absence of actual memorial or marker of our family's past. So in this particular story, I suggested that salt acted as a kind of way of connecting to history and to the past through a performative action in a particular place. In the third journey, I traced the history of the saltfish that was for sale in the market. And this took me to the Saline in Portugal, where I recorded the kind of making of salt in the traditional way. And I became interested in the way that salt crystallizes and the duration of this happening. So I made an installation in a gallery which repeated this on a smaller scale. And this, for me, was about the way that salt is an unpredictable and changing force that crystallizes, dissolves. But within that, it contains a kind of index of the sea, because it kind of refers to the sea in the way that the sea is constantly changing. So it began to have a sense of salt as connecting to something much more international and the connections between different parts of the world through trade and migration. So in the fourth project, I went to Haiti in the Caribbean region. And first of all, I was interested in how salt had been connected to slavery and had certain kinds of histories that made it seem something that was enslaving. In Haiti, there's a myth that a zombie can be woken up through tasting salt. So I was really interested in how salt might represent
regeneration. And we made a performance there which was using a traditional voodoo technique called veve with salt. And we offered everybody to taste the salt. And the salt came from a particular salt pan, Saline in Haiti, which was the first kind of colonial salines in Haiti. So it very much was about salt as a kind of liberation from particular kinds of histories, but also connecting back to those pasts. So in these 4 different journeys, each time I went, I brought in on the detour, I brought in the retour back to Brixton these ideas about salt, and I made projects there in collaboration with the community, which was trying to look at their own histories and how these connected to their diasporas, and how we might try and reinsert these histories and diasporas back into what's happening in Brixton now. So essentially, my kind of proposal is that salt, particularly poetics, offers a way of understanding migration and diaspora and connecting these back to like particular places, and a kind of poetics of regeneration that takes into account these different cultural understandings. And through this, I'm hoping that I can produce a kind of poetics of salt that talks about the different meanings of salt in different associations, but also how it connects through what I think Glissant calls kind of poetics of relation, where there are ways that we are see each other as different, but ways that we're also connected. And I think salt is a particular substance that allows us to see our connections and our interconnected histories. So that's kind of my main points in my poster. I think I've also put some key references, and I draw on literature. I also draw on histories of salt and histories of kind of the Black Atlantic and Atlantic trade and migration. And I put on the right-hand side a list of Jones' 13 associations of salt, and I can read them out if I've got time. So, the 13 kinds of associations he lists are preservation and durability, hospitality, contracts and loyalty, money, value, commodity and transaction, essence and soul, protection through magic, medicine, religion and ritual, its procreative, generative and life-giving qualities, the connections between taste and language, and its solubility and ability to combine with other materials, and finally, its ability to cleanse and purify. So I'm really fascinated by developing this work further and thinking about how we associate particular meanings with salt and how these connect to both our local places, but also to our interconnected other places, our heres and our elsewheres. And that's, yes, do you want me to carry on, or shall I finish? Hello? Yes. Okay.
Oui, absolument. Non, juste une mini-conclusion, peut-être. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So, finally, just to say that my use of salt practices in my salt art practices is to try and generate this poetics of regeneration that offers different readings of place and pays respect to the past. Salt offers a different way of giving meaning to a place, its heritage and its regeneration, by acknowledging the relational aspects of place. And my thesis argues that the process of regeneration needs to pay attention to our past in the process of creating renewal, and that the poetics of salt was a particular way to understand this through the way that the material culture of salt connects different journeys, migrations and diasporas.
Merci beaucoup, grand merci, parce que l'exercice n'était pas facile avec la ligne, chère Katy. Donc, thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.